So I'm going to break this up into two sections. The first section is going to be the first 5 things on this list. And actually, it's not the top 10 tips. So I forgot to correct my slide. Tracy will fix that before we publish it. But it's the top 6 tips for improving reach and impact. So the first 5 are just kind of across the Microsoft 365 services, such as Teams and SharePoint and Yammer or Viva Engage. I'm really looking forward to when our branding renaming is done, so we can just call it Viva Engage and not have to mention the Yammer and Viva Engage naming change. But this is what we're going to talk about today. So we'll start with the first one. And this is honestly the thing that is one of my topics I'm passionate about. I think that when you look at our services as a customer, as an employee, as a human, right, like we have a lot of different apps for communication and collaboration. And so I know that the things on this page, I'm oversimplifying, but I'm doing that for a reason. Because we're going to ignore apps and teams. We're going to ignore all the other stuff that goes on. But like, this is my very simplified starting point when I talk to customers about like, let's think about where content starts, right? We know that we can share things across all of these great apps and services. So I can, for example, publish an important employee communications news in SharePoint because it has great page layout and visual, aspects, and I can include information from other systems. I can include Viva Engage feeds. Like I can do all sorts of stuff, but that article sits in SharePoint. But I don't have to experience it there. I can share that SharePoint article over email. Like out of the box functionality, you can create a newsletter digest. I can also share that via Teams. I can share it via Viva Engage or Yammer. I can, post it in as a SharePoint, pin something as a SharePoint page in Teams. So it's like all of that integration is like, let's start in the right place and then just share it out where people are working. So like kind of step 1 is like, let's get things where they belong. I will say that Microsoft is no different than you. We don't do everything in like what I'll call the right place for purposes of this discussion. So not everybody at Microsoft has always been a fan of Yammer. So like we have many, many communities and teams today. We're migrating them, like at least within our customer success organization that we work in, we're trying to get all of our communities out of Teams and into Viva Engage because it's just better there. But that's human behavior and change, right? Like, so it takes us time, but we're getting our communities there. We are making good progress. So let's start where we should start. So let's get our work in Microsoft Teams. So we have our documents and we have our chats and our channels and our meetings. Let's use SharePoint for all the wonderful things it can produce for content, beautiful internet communication sites. So when you go to your HR site or your IT site or sales, operations, all of the different things you have in your companies, that is your virtual place, right? Like if I'm in a building, I can walk to that department, maybe, that we live in a hybrid world. I don't know how that works, but this is your virtual place. So SharePoint is your home. And Viva Engaged, you probably heard lots about last week, so I won't belabor it too much, but like it does lots of things and we've expanded capabilities recently, but it's your communities. It's your place to connect across the organization. It's the place to interact with people that aren't on your team. They're not in your geography or your location, but they're people that are interested in the same things as you and maybe have a different perspective to share. This is where innovation happens. We lost innovation during the pandemic because people were at home. They weren't having coffee. They weren't meeting random, people in the cafeteria that they didn't work with. They weren't overhearing conversations in line getting a coffee. And so we actually lost some of that accidental innovation that occurs. And so communities are a great way for people to kind of see, oh, well, this person is thinking about this topic, but they're looking at it in a completely different job role. And then that sparks either problem solving or it sparks new ideas and creativity. And then last, sadly, email is still here. So I started as a developer in 1993. So I've now just hit my 30 years as of last month. So we kept joking at the end of the 90s that email was dead and it would go away. And so we've added all these great things, but surprise, email still has a role and it's still there. And I know people that like they'll go to their dying to their deathbed, email in hand, because that's how they communicate. They like it because it's like their inbox, it's official record. it's controlled, right? So like when things are out there, people can delete, you can, the owner can delete a SharePoint page, you can delete Viva Engage posts or comments or whatever, but like the email that came to your inbox, like that's your content, you have a record, you have control over it. And there's official things that our companies need to send out that need to be official. So that's totally fine. It still has a place. I still wish I got a little bit less every day. Anyway, so this is kind of where we're starting, is like, try and start with the right app for the right purpose. Now, I will caveat this with, we'll talk about this briefly in a couple of slides, but like, choose the model for your team. Like I say, start here, but like your apps may be a little different and that's fine. But like, choose them, decide what you're going to use for each of like your main categories of communication. And that just gives you a great starting place so that you're not duplicating. Like I said, today we have communities and teams. We have communities in Viva Engage, and like that's not useful for people. It's not a great experience, and like oftentimes we're posting stuff in two places because we can't get people to shut one of them down. So it's really good to have clear purpose and use for each of those apps. So step 2 is to really just meet your employees where they are. Obviously, different companies have different mobile device management policies, but to the extent that you're able to, let them use the device they want, whether that's a laptop or desktop, a tablet or a phone. And so being able, especially when we think about content, being able to consume that content from anywhere is powerful, because while I may not be motivated to read the company news when I'm in the middle of doing all of my work during the day, let's say I'm sitting at the chiropractor's office to undo the damage from sitting at a desk for 30 years. So like I'm sitting at the chiropractor, I can sit there and scroll through news content, either using my Viva Connections app, my Viva Engage app, my SharePoint app. I mean, there's lots of ways for me to sit there and pass the time, because maybe I'm sitting there for 15 minutes. Once again, I don't have to take time out of, all of the work tasks that are staring me in the face with deadlines. I can actually do it when my mind would otherwise be occupied by looking at a television with, some home improvement show. I don't know how they do things over in your part of the world, but like our doctor's offices seem to be either telling you what's wrong with you, medications that can solve your problem, or how to fix your house. Like, that's what we offer. So like, it's a great way to give people the option to experience things on any device. And then second, using the app they prefer. So to our prior page of apps, these are kind of the core 4. We have SharePoint, Outlook for email, Teams, and Viva Engage. And so thinking about it, like, you can experience your SharePoint content in SharePoint. You can experience it within Viva Connections and Teams. It might be shared through a Viva Engage community. You might get a link to a newsletter in your Outlook inbox. So once again, like, author it where it belongs, in that right place, that right app, but then support the app so that people can choose. We actually have a Viva Engage app for Outlook. We have a Viva Engage app for Teams. We have a web browser, have mobile apps, right? So you can kind of, as an employee, it's great to have the choice to experience that content where you want, instead of being forced into like, must use web browser, must use Teams, you must use Viva Engage. Like, maybe I see my Viva Engage content through the Viva Connections feed, or maybe I see it through a different app, but like, it's still the same content, the same community information. So just once again, just kind of supporting all of the apps so that people have the ability to consume information their way. And it's always better when you're not kind of pushed down one technology path. So this goes back to the prior slide. So I've already covered that. So it's just a what to use when policy for your org. So like I said, it does not have to agree with Heather's view of the world. You do not have to agree with me. That is completely fine. But come up with something that looks like this slide for your organization. And so when you start there, it makes everything easier. And like 100%, I'm going to acknowledge you're not brand new companies. So like, you might have some change management to get people from 8 apps to 4 apps. Like, maybe they're using third-party tools, maybe there's just legacy stuff around, but just figure out what the right apps are for your company and then go forward with that model. Second thing for sharing news, so going back to letting people experience information and content where they want, is leverage Viva Engage. So if you've got active communities, you've got an active all company community in Viva Engage, or specific communities, share your relevant news there. So if you have company-wide information, put that in all company and Viva Engage. If you have something that's specific to a particular group or project, then put it in the appropriate community if it exists, because then once again, like some people, they want an email notification. Some people are going to go to the SharePoint site because they know that's where all that information is. But then some people are just going to be, maybe I go there to ask a question and, oh, I see this pinned announcement. And so now I've found out something I would have known about otherwise. So it's really nice to have those options. So leveraging Viva Engage to amplify what you've already done in SharePoint is fantastic, because the person is probably already in Viva Engage because they want to share something, they want to ask a question, or they're there because they've been tagged to help somebody else out. So like, because they got to Viva Engage, they're now, you have this opportunity to give them additional information. So just using that as another news outlet or way to amplify what you already have is fantastic. Embed Viva Engage or Yammer feeds in your SharePoint pages. I'm going to stop sharing. I got to figure out if it's possible. I don't think it is, but I would love to have like two sharing. Like I want to have like PowerPoint and like screen. And I have a widescreen monitor, so if I share my screen, it always looks really bad. So give me 1 second. But this is the one that I wanted to do like live demo of, because if you're not a SharePointy person like I am, then it's not going to make sense what I'm talking about. So give me 1 moment. I'm going to edit this page and delete the web part. All right. Got it set up. So this is actually in our live Microsoft environment. Had to make sure I don't have anything that shouldn't be showing on a recorded screen. Okay, so this is like, we actually have a Viva pod in the customer success organization. So like, this is our very simple site. We use it mainly for posting newsletters. And now my browser hates me, so give me a second. There we go. All right, so if you look for Yammer, this hasn't been renamed, but you can see I can do conversations or highlights. And then, and hopefully you're seeing my screen, hopefully you can see I can choose community, user, topic, or home feed. So in this case, I'm going to go look for something that says Viva. And so I'm just going to do Viva Engaging Yammer, which is an internal community. And I can choose my layouts, but you can see this is like essentially embedded within my SharePoint page. So alongside the news, I now have, I'm going to republish this. And sorry about the yowly cat. Oh my goodness. So this is what you get. And so now I have a relevant community sitting in my site. So super simple. As you can see, it takes like literally 15 seconds to do, but it's a way to get your community content in line with your actual intranet content. So you don't have to, once again, you don't have to go to both places. You can give your employees, so like say you have a human resources site, and say you have, part of that would be maybe new employee onboarding is under human resources. So you could actually embed a new employee onboarding community within your HR site, maybe on the new employee onboarding page. So once again, just bringing all of that together so that people are experiencing all of the information in one place. All right, back to PowerPoint. And it also doesn't remember what slide I was on. I think that's the downside of working for Microsoft, is we have like all of these ideas for all the things it should do, because we are also users of the technology. All right, trying to be mindful of time, so we're going to wrap up this slide. So another thing you can do is you can actually pin SharePoint pages as tabs in a Teams channel. So if you have a SharePoint site, that SharePoint page that is sitting within your team, if you've added some page content within your team. So in case anybody is not aware, because it is a little technical, every Microsoft Teams team is basically built on a SharePoint team site. So you can actually have documents as well as web pages in that site that's supporting the Microsoft Teams team. I think it's awful that we call them teams. Anyway, it's all good. It's hard to talk to, but you can actually pin as a tab. So like you can integrate your SharePoint pages into Teams as well. And then the last bit is really leveraging Power Automate. So what used to be called Flow, but it's basically our workflow solution in Microsoft 365. But you can create notifications. Now, I'm going to say this with caution, because like I think most of us get too many notifications. We don't like noise. But if there's places where it's useful to know that something has occurred, you can leverage what you've paid for with your licensing. Anything you're doing around Power Automate that's connecting to like SharePoint and Viva Engage there's no additional cost for that. So like say that I know that they're publishing a newsletter on Viva Connections every 2 weeks out of this one group. I can actually like check for new content and have it put a Teams notification in my Viva pod. So once again, I don't have to go do that work. I don't have to check. I let the technology do the work for me. So once again, some of this you can do at the corporate level and do for others. And then maybe this is also just a tip you build in for people that own sites. So telling HR they can, do things as part of, just general training, but just ways to be smarter about how we make people aware of things that are new and updated without having human intervention doing that. All right, so moving forward. Audiences. So you can see here the example is audiences used on pages, but you can see on the left, if you're a SharePoint person, this will make sense. If you're not a SharePoint person, you can just go la 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 for the next 30 seconds and it's okay. I will not be offended. But all of these different elements within SharePoint, and these are all different types of web parts. Web parts are just like the little boxes on the page, but you can filter them. And so it's not security, it's just what's presented to a person. And what these audiences do for you is it means that if you know that, like, say this piece of content in Microsoft was only relevant to customer success. So like your Microsoft people that are here on this call, like we should see that, but it wouldn't be relevant to people in engineering or IT or other parts of the organization. They can actually use an audience setting on that page to say it's for customer success. And so I will see it because I care about it, but my colleague who works in the OneDrive SharePoint team in engineering, he wouldn't see it. And so it's not, I could send him a link to it if it was interesting and I wanted to share. So it's not security, but it's just basically allowing you to give more relevant information based upon membership in a group. So if I know that somebody works in a particular job role, or if they work in a particular team or department or organizational unit, these audiences are really fantastic for just getting less information on the page. So say I start out with 20 articles that are going to cover everybody, but maybe people see on average 8 to 10 because I'm using audiences wisely. I've reduced the amount of information presented to them, and I've made sure that it's relevant to them as an employee, as a person. And we all know that doing that is just going to make our employees more likely to read it because it's relevant. When you see things that you know are not relevant to you, you roll your eyes, you get annoyed, you may not even stay on the page because you're like, why are you showing me this? So like this just creates a better experience and greater likelihood of them reading those articles. And then our last tip before we get to Viva Connections is there's a thing in SharePoint called an organizational news site. They get special visual treatment. So if you see on the right, it says News at Contoso, and it's got this blue banner around it. And so what that means is that I know that's coming from an official organizational place, right? So it's coming from the entire company, it's coming from human resources or IT or whoever, but like it's like an official statement. So it will be prominent that it's more of an official communication than maybe other articles that are in my feed. You can have up to 100 of these, so that's fairly good as far as everybody gets to have the fun discussion in your company of who gets an organizational news site and who doesn't, like so identifying those official sites. And then if you have spent any time looking at Viva Connections, you know that there's a thing called a home site. It's automatically an organizational news site. So all of that to say is you can give your official organizational content visual prominence so that people understand that maybe those are the things they choose to read, as opposed to if I'm presented with 20 articles, but 3 are coming from official company places, maybe those are the 3 that I take time because I can't read them all. So it's just another way to make sure people are reading the things that matter.
Heather, just jumping in, we've got a couple of questions about audience grouping and how those are created. And could you really quickly just cover off on that? There's just enough interest that I'd really like to touch on it if we can, please.
Yeah, so the groups are just Azure Active Directory groups in M365. So if you have an Azure Active Directory group sitting out there, you can leverage it for audiences. So it's really that simple. And then as you type in the name, it'll start to filter those group names. I'm sure some companies probably have a crazy amount of groups just due to size, but your groups are created the same way as any other group that you have in your Microsoft environment, online environment. So hopefully that answers the questions. And we were like at a perfect stopping place. All right, so now I'm going to share my Viva Connections at Microsoft rather than show you something that is our test environment. But Tracy, have you shared Viva Connections in the first 2 sessions, or is it brand new to this audience?
So the first session that we ran was a sort of holistic overview of all of the comm solutions. So anybody that was in the first session will have seen a brief demo of it. They will have seen some screenshots of it, but this will be the first deep dive.
All right, so let me share my team screen. So I'm going to give you a very quick overview because I want to be mindful of time. But the nice thing is there's essentially 3 parts to Viva Connections. And so the top, we have what's called the stripe, and it's my links to all of the other Viva apps. If you've been to any of our other events or sessions that talked about any of these other Viva Engage, for certain last week you talked about, but there's Viva Goals, Viva Insights, Viva Learnings, there's topics and other products releasing shortly. So like this will expand to include access to all of the different Viva apps. The second part, which is like kind of the shining star, is like all of the dashboard cards. So you can see that Microsoft has developed cards for us to let me see my pay stub, to let me know my next vesting date for stock. We have a Perks Plus wellness fund, so I can pay for my gym membership. I can buy ergonomic furniture for my home office. It's meant to support, well-being and productivity. So we have money allocated every year, so I can go see what that balance is or submit a claim. I can get training. I can enter my time off. We've recently changed to an unlimited time off policy here in the US, so I no longer see like what my balance is. I can also send praise to my colleagues. Perspectives is internal feedback. And sadly, I do not live near a Microsoft office, so there is no food. I'll probably share this later, but I will say, if you want people to come to your Viva Connections app, like just make it easy for them to order food and beverages, and you will have a successful adoption of your application. Anyway, we will get to the important part for today's discussion, is the feed. And so you can see I'm getting content from Yammer. We haven't finished rebranding to Viva Engage, but I'm getting Yammer, more Yammer. You can see this is coming from MSW or Microsoft Web. You can see I have a link to our intranet at the top, which I'll show when I'm done with the feed scrolling. But you can see all of the different articles that are coming through to me. So if I come here to submit a claim because I want to buy a new chair for my home office, I'm also going to see all of this information. And once again, just in the flow of what I'm doing, I didn't get a Teams notification and I didn't get email about it. It's just showing up here. So this is our new experience that we released in May, but the flip side of this is that I can also click here if it's going to cooperate, and it'll take me to our Microsoft homepage. So this is MSW or Microsoft Web, and you can see all of the different content. We've got obviously a spotlight on an AI because it seems like that's all we're highlighting in the news these days. You can see the same feed that we had on the other screen, but it's nice to have the ability to look at the intranet without having to click out of where I was in Teams. And so to summarize, this is the Stripe access to your Viva apps. This is your feed on the right. That's going to come from SharePoint news sites. It's going to come from Viva Engage or Yammer. And also, if you're using stream video, you'll actually have that content show up here as well. And there's like algorithms that determine what's shown, and you can influence that as well. And the main thing here is, remember, like, these are the things that we're going to talk about in a minute, but like the dashboard part of Viva Connections is really the shining star with this new experience. And it's the things that you put there to really just make life better for your employees. And we'll talk about those very shortly. But I did want to show you because showing always better than PowerPointing, at least from my experience. I don't want to be responsible. Oh, I never launched my poll. All right. While we're loading up the PowerPoint, I'm launching my poll. So when we talk about getting people to consume content, so one of the things that matters, and I'm going to launch the poll, one of the things that matters is actually like our generations. And so some people, like, this is going to impact like whether I like email, whether I think Viva Engage is a good idea, like whether I'm comfortable sharing or not. It's also going to impact like, do I prefer videos over reading, right? Like, do I want to watch somebody do like a 5-minute overview of the issue and the information, or do I want to read like a page for 2 minutes? Now, the answer for me is I want to read because I read really fast. And I can also multitask. So I can sit in that meeting and don't tell my boss, but occasionally there are meetings that do not require my full attention, and I can multitask and read while I'm in the meeting. Bad habits. But everybody's going to have a different perspective on like their comfort using different types of these professional equivalents of social media. So like a Viva Engage, they're going to have different comfort levels with that. They're going to have different preferences on email, where they get their notifications, how they get their notifications, where they read things. So all of this is a consideration. And so I see we have, my generation is well represented today. So welcome to all the Gen Xers. We seem to be dominating today's presentation. Awesome. Nobody actually remembers that we're a generation. So this is actually exciting. All right, getting back to the content. All right, so before we start into this, I've done the quick demo. We just finished that. I do want to say that I'm going to go very quickly through this to allow time for questions at the end. There is a lot of content in here. It would probably take another hour or more to go through it. We don't want to bore you. We don't want to get overly complicated, because if you're new to Viva Connections, a lot of this is going to not make sense, right? So we're going to keep it high level, but there are a lot of good slides. It's posted on our adoption site. I'll share the link when I'm done here, but it's really good content if you're using Viva Connections, if you're thinking about using Viva Connections, but like absolutely, this is one of the best things that's come out this year as far as knowing what makes us successful. So I'm going to we're going to start with number 1. And so our first tip is weekly usage. So now that we've all acknowledged that I'm old, I still get print magazines. I don't get print newspapers anymore, but I do get print magazines. And so one of the reasons I went away from the print newspaper, I used to get the Wall Street Journal, but I found that I just wasn't reading it often enough. And so to like have it delivered, have to recycle it, and like I might read it a couple of days a month, it just like it wasn't worth it to me to pay for all that for just like reading it 2 times a month. And so when you think about your content and your communications and the important things that you're putting out there, it needs to be at least weekly. So like some things are probably more timely and require more urgent action, but generally like people should be in, and this is within the scope of Viva Connections, but probably extends to your intranet as well, is like a weekly usage model. So like once a week, people should be aware, what are the latest organizational announcements, what's going on, what are people talking about? So that weekly model we find to be a good balance of timeliness of information without over inundating people and trying to make them think they need to do it daily or even more frequently. And so when we talk about engagement, and I'll just spend 30 seconds here or less, when we talk about engagement, so if you remember those cards that I had on my screen, so like my time off, we had, access to cafeteria if I had one, submitting a claim for my Perks Plus fund, looking at my pay stub, whatever. Engagement means I didn't just like look at Viva Connections. I actually clicked on one of those things and maybe took an action, or I clicked a level deep to like get more information. So when you're engaged, it means that you're not just like opening Viva Connections, you're actually like reading content there and interacting with it, or taking an action on one of those cards. So that's how we define engagement. And that's what we think is a good model. That's a good behavior to look for weekly behavior, because we know that when we have that weekly usage, that people are getting value, they're finding the information they need, they're able to complete their tasks, that we put their to make their life better. And that's the weekly is that right set. So I added a couple of slides here, and it's really, I was trying to find the right wording for this, but we're going to say we're going to trick your employees into reading your articles and posts. So this is what I was actually had it called, like the unpleasant truths about content for content creators or communicators. But very few of us are seeking out content, right? We're not going out to the internet because we just have nothing else to do, and we're not just like scanning articles, checking our inbox for notifications for that. Like I'm usually filtering like out the notifications so I can get to my customer related stuff. So we know that generally speaking, people they don't think our content is important as we think it is. Two, as humans, we can be selfish creatures. So we want to take advantage of that and like take that into account. So when we give everybody a reason to go to Viva Connections, they will choose to go there. So if you've made it so they can submit their timesheet or their expense sheet, Tracy, we were talking yesterday, a customer thought it was great to be able to order coffee and not have to wait in the queue. So all of these things, because you're giving the employee a personal benefit from using Viva Connections, they'll go there. Like you don't have to tell them, you've made their life easier by offering that experience in Viva Connections. Now, here's the sneaky parts, part 3. So while they're there, being the selfish humans that they are, trying to do their thing, whether it's ordering coffee or lunch or doing their time entry, or maybe requesting a shift change with a colleague, they're going to get presented with hopefully visually appealing and interesting content. So those articles you saw on my screen that were coming from our intranet and from Viva Engage, some of those are going to interest people, and they will click on them and they will react to them. And it's all like, they're oblivious to the fact that like they've been, receiving communications because they just went there to maybe put in their time for the day. But, maybe they're sitting there waiting on their ride home or whatever. And so like they might start scrolling those articles and click on one. Once again, completely unintentional on their part, but we've tricked them into reading content. So and then we'll be very happy with ourselves for being sneaky. So when it comes to these dashboard cards, if you've gone to our technical conversations, you'll also hear them referred to as ACE cards, and that's adaptive card extensions. But I like to stay out of the technical mumbo jumbo for this level of conversation. But for these dashboard cards, they're going to be 3 categories. It's either help me find, so customer lookup, like I am begging us to build one for our organization because I just want to be able to put in a customer name or ID and like have it just bring me up everything I want to know in a happy place. So we're trying to build these as fast as we can as well. It could also be a help me do. So submit the time card. So it's submit time, submit expenses, order my lunch, whatever those things are. Even the send praise or, send feedback to another person on your team, that's all the doing, right? And once again, you haven't had to like save a browser favorite or gone to HR Web because you couldn't remember what that link was or search for it. And HR Web is like our human resources site. So it's once again, just bringing those common things up front to the employee in one place. And then the last is tell me status. So if I have an upcoming training course due, maybe a month ahead, it starts saying, hey, you have this course, it's not complete. And it could be training, it could be submitting information, whatever those things are. But once again, giving you that timely information in that one place. So you know that if you go there, you're going to be aware of all the things you need to know and also have quick and easy access to information and tasks. We know from experience that the highest impact cards integrate with your business processes and systems. So the easier ones are the ones that are pre-built. So think ServiceNow, being able to just like open a help desk or service desk ticket with one click, like that gets people very happy. As long as their problem is not that they can't log in, because then that probably wouldn't work because they wouldn't be able to get into Teams. But we'll ignore that one scenario. But like being able to log a help desk ticket, I think anybody would be a big fan of being able to do with one button press. And then the second one, which takes a little bit longer, is integrating with your line of business application. So we know that the things that have the most value to employees are the things that are tied into their work. So say I'm a quality inspector, having that form where I can just enter like 4 or 5 pieces of data and push the button, having that like on my dashboard because it knows what my job role is, super helpful. Once again, I didn't have to open lots of apps. I'm still in Teams, and it just makes it super simple. And then the last topic is like customers ask, well, what should these cards be? Like, obviously, the sky is the limit. You could do anything given time and money, but there's probably a place to start. And so your employees have probably already told you. Back to our human nature, we tend to complain a lot more than we compliment. I don't know the last time as an IT person, somebody called you up to say, thank you for deploying that new system or updating our email program. Like, nobody does that. They complain when things don't work. They complain when they're slow. And here are some of the complaints that are like maybe good ideas for dashboard card consideration. The I can't find. So things that are frequently used, but maybe people have a hard time finding. It could be a dashboard card. It could also just be on the global navigation. I'll go back to that before we close. But there's navigation, which I forgot to demonstrate, but there's navigation there as well. And so like you can actually solve the I can't find using different options. The it's too many steps or clicks. So like with a time card, like say somebody is an hourly employee and they have to clock in and out and they have to enter maybe some information. So if they've got to switch to a different app and go through a process, if you take that times, say 1,000 employees times, their work year, that's a lot of time. So if you can take it from 5 minutes to 2 minutes, like that's one of those really impactful things. And once again, our goal here, if we don't remember the previous slide, is we want to create the reason for them to go to Viva Connections. So we're going to put all of these great things that make their lives better on these dashboard cards with the underlying motive of we're also going to put some content there and trick them into reading it and maybe take action on it. And so, as I mentioned, the employees, look at your employee feedback. It takes too long. I can't find it, or I wasn't aware. So when we think about the tell me status, like you have upcoming deadline for your training, or you need to submit, like this is our performance review season. So like you must submit this and it's due in 5 days. Like, so to have that upfront in your face so that you don't miss those important deadlines. All right. So there are lots of great slides here, but we're going to fast forward because we're running short on time. I don't think I need to share this. I'm going to cover it in 10 seconds, but since you're mainly communicators, I'm assuming you know the importance of keeping your news feed fresh and compelling. So just making sure that the organization news sites, the people that are publishing content and news articles are doing so with a regular cadence so that people don't see month-old articles or worse, right, as they're going out there, because it generally makes us not want to go back because we see that people aren't keeping the information up to date. But once again, I know you know this. We've also found that prioritizing the mobile experience has benefit because generally speaking, our frontline workers are on mobile devices and may not even have a laptop or a desktop that they use. And then also the scenario that I mentioned earlier is even our office workers or knowledge workers, if they're at their desk, there's a very high chance that they're doing work, which means that they might be on their coffee break or their lunch break or elsewhere when they're actually doing the task, engaging with the content. And so having that mobile experience as a priority gives people that option instead of seeing it as something they can only do from their desk. And then our last piece of advice here is like very specific to the Viva Connections app, and it's to pin it in Teams. And I'll go back to Teams here in a second. But to pin it when you're ready. So like if you pin the app in Teams and you don't really have a lot of good dashboard cards, if you don't have a lot of content, people will see that it's not really helpful or valuable, and it's really hard to get them back. So just like if you go to a restaurant or somewhere else and you have like this horrible experience, you really don't want to go back. You're not likely to go back. So that's much more focused towards Viva Connections, but making sure that you pin it for everybody when it's ready to go and when you have that experience in a good place. All right, so I'm going to go back to Teams one last time before we close out. And thank you for bearing with the screen changes. All right, so I'm back here. And the thing that I did not show was this. And so in addition to a review, we have our Stripe for our Viva apps. We have our dashboard cards in the middle, which we've just been talking about for a while. And then we have our newsfeed coming from SharePoint, coming from Viva Engage, and coming from Stream Video. So the part that I neglected to discuss was this. Sorry, my screen is being a little weird. So it is our navigation. So this is your global navigation and SharePoint. And so you have all of these links. So when we talk about getting people access to things they use all the time, this is also, in addition to dashboard cards for certain pieces of information, you can also just put links within this navigation section. Makes it really easy. And from our earlier slide, you might remember that these have audience settings. So people don't all have to see the same navigation items, and you can keep the navigation smaller for each person because they're seeing different things based on their job role or location or organizational unit. And then the last part is, if you've ever been to the SharePoint homepage, you'll see your frequent sites and your followed sites. So you'll actually get quick access to those things as well. All right. We have 9 minutes, so hopefully I'm doing okay, Tracy. I don't know how much time we usually have for Q&A.